The elusive young conservative. Do they exist? Do they exist in Canada? Are there young conservatives really? Well, you're basically looking at one. I would describe myself as a young conservative. But thankfully, the majority of young conservatives don't look like me. And they look a whole lot better, and they are a whole lot better. And today we're going to be speaking to one of them. Sam Dagres is a reporter with the Postmillennial. She has her own show called Chicks and Balances. It airs every Wednesday on our channel. And she's a young conservative. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of what that means, what the future looks like, and how we can do better to attract young people. I think you're really going to enjoy it. My name's Angelo, and this is Cancel This. All right, Sam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Angelo.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the team. I think it's good to have younger conservatives involved in what we do. And that's the reason why I really wanted to talk to you today, because I feel like it's important to get a perspective of young conservatives in Canada, of our makeup, of what issues are important to us, and of who we are, because we're not necessarily identical to the generation before us, and we're living in a country that is progressively moving in a different direction. So I feel like your voice and perspective is valuable to what we do. But I guess just to begin with a pretty heavy question, what makes you believe in what you believe in terms of conservatism, in terms of, if you even call yourself a conservative, technically, we can get into that, but what is it that really motivates you as a young person to be in this camp versus the other?
Right. So that is a very heavy question. It's a confluence of things. First and foremost, I think, like many of us, it's family values that were passed on to me by my parents. It was, things like hard work and responsibility, honesty. These are all things that I think most of us have been instilled with. And I think as I go through the world and I become more political and I gain more job experience, I think that just culminates into kind of a conservative perspective on things, in a philosophical sense, not necessarily a policy sense. It's also my background in philosophy. I read a lot of classical liberals, and I thought their ideas resonated with me. I thought that a lot of teenage angst was assuaged by reading some more classical liberals. Again, this idea, it's a very American transcendental idea that you really should march to the beat of your own drum. And, what is true for you will be true to most people. And I think that strong sense of self that I developed over my university years and with the help of my family really consolidated this desire to be self-reliant and ensure that kind of pervaded every area of my life. So that's kind of my motivation. That's not a real concrete answer, but the reason I joined the movement more precisely is because I thought that political circles, more liberal political circles, when we were in, university, in my case in CEGEP, they were very constraining. It was kind of this constant self-flagellation of feeling guilty, of repenting, mostly a politics of misery. And one of my friends one day said, the conservatives, in 2017, I believe, were having a leadership debate in my city. And she said, come along. And I said, sure. And just the hopefulness in the room was something that was completely alien to my experience with politics. And even though the demographics, were, tilted towards one, I just thought, like, it was incredible that young people still believed in themselves and believed in hard work and kind of getting ahead while kind of uplifting their community. And it wasn't always this, regressive outlook on life. And so I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, it's a heavy question, but I there's a few things that I want to touch on there. You mentioned philosophy. That's an interesting answer to me, because when you think of a philosophy major or, a young person who's into philosophy in sort of 2021, I think a lot of people assume that one who is acquainted or interested in philosophy is most interested in postmodernism, Derrida, Foucault, that seems to be like the modern milieu of a lot of philosophy students. So it's interesting to hear that you had an interest in the classics. And I mean, without getting into it too much, I know people will get a headache from this, but I'm a philosophy nerd myself. Are there any particular philosophers that inspired you?
Yeah, I thought reading Emerson was like life changing. Um, I was lucky, I did a liberal arts program, which is basically a CJEP program where you kind of are um, taught all the kind of the main seven disciplines. So mathematics, ancient science, philosophy. And so we got to the classics, you know, your Plato, your Kant, your Descartes, much before we were able to get to the post-classical philosophy. And I think that was very formative because people that go straight into philosophy in university per se, you get to select which philosophy classes you take. And a lot of them end up starting with critical race theory, which taught by professors who are very skilled, rhetoricians, is very convincing. So I think I was lucky to start with the classicists, and then I was able to make my mind up about Foucault, about the Frankfurt School, which is compelling if it's kind of the only philosophy you've heard. What about you, Angelo? Who's the most formative?
Well, definitely like Aristotle, Plato definitely stick out to me. Immanuel Kant is definitely there. I think, what really spoke to me is what you're talking about in terms of the postmodernism of things. If you take classes that are on philosophy, for example, you will start with critical race theory. And to your point, you mentioned the fact that at a first glance, it's actually quite compelling to, consider the idea that absolutely everything is subjective, that there is not necessarily an objective reality or truth or morality. But at least I found it to be very hollow. And I guess I was lucky in the same way as you. Again, I grew up in Greece, so I was like immediately always acquainted with the classics. But I wonder if that is the key. I wonder if that is, how to prevent more people from being attracted to that. I think a lot of people have this notion, a lot of young people have this notion that, well, you're reading Socrates or something. This is someone from thousands of years ago. People were stupid cavemen that didn't know what they were talking about. It was a patriarchy, so on and so forth. Whereas Foucault and Derrida are more contemporary and intellectual and wiser. Even though I think it's confirmed. Wasn't Foucault like, isn't it alleged that he was like a child molester now?
Oh, so I don't know anything about that.
Well, point being, that postmodernism is not all that it's made to be. So it's interesting that influenced you. Were you ever not conservative? And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people that I know who were liberal, maybe capital L liberal, if we're talking in terms of partisan. And it's not that they shifted, but it's that the culture shifted around them to such a degree that the Overton window shifted left, and they naturally just fitted in with what conservatives now were. Do you think that speaks to you, or were you just inherently always a conservative person?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was president of my social justice club in high school.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was kind of the first. I think my high school wasn't flagrantly political, but our first taste of politics and like discourse was very left, and so I thought it was like most left-leaning kids nowadays. You just felt like it was the right position to have, like it unquestionably. And then CJEP was kind of the same. But what really galvanized me to kind of tread my own way was that it was just so dogmatic at some point. And it was so like seeped in yeah, I guess dogma, that there was this one instance where I was an editor at a newspaper, and one of our writers had written an article about how testosterone does not affect any level of athleticism. And I had a friend who was a bodybuilder at the time, and he goes, "This is insane. This is so unscientific." And I think little things like that kind of started chipping away at my belief that the leftist position was the right one, because all of my friends were left and they were good people. So yeah, I definitely started there, but slowly made my way up the well, and out of the cave, and yeah,
Out of the
finally right
cave,
here.
right. So I think you mentioned something there that's interesting to me, that goes back to, I think, our generation's childhood. I think I'm only like 2 years older than you. Your friends were good people and they were left.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a stereotype or an archetype in Western society growing up, at least for me, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, that a conservative, that's the bad guy. That's like the mustache twirling villain who wants to like pollute the environment and take all this money, and he hates people that are not like him, and he's just the CEO in a boardroom. That's what conservatism is. And liberalism is this freeing, we support people who don't have things, and we're the good guys, we're the rebels, we're the good guys in the story. Do you think that archetype of left and right existed in your upbringing?
Yeah, not in so many words, but I think it must have been unconsciously there for me to reject it as something that I did not want to be affiliated with. I think the demographic certainly doesn't make it very appealing for young people to join. I think, I'm sure we'll talk about this afterwards, but there's definitely an old guard to conservatism, and precisely conservative, the party in Canada. And, I think we grew up with a little more progressive ideas in school, and that there are issues that, the old guard holds that I don't think me and you hold necessarily. And that the left has been very good to spin those as, like moral issues. The environment is a moral issue. Abortion it's a black and white. It's a moral issue. And I think that when you're growing up, you want to fit in. You want your peers to like you. So to even explore those ideas as having, some gray area is scary, and you don't want to be villainized. But certainly the caricature was, it's omnipresent almost.
Yeah. Well, that's what it seems like. And I'm glad you brought up the party so we can get into that a little bit. But first, let's talk about demographics. Mm. You mentioned going to the convention for the first time. You mentioned the reality of the situation, that you stick out because the party itself is
Mm-hmm.
made up of men, is made up of older men. I think this is something that young conservatives are definitely changing, because I see, when I look at young conservatives, I see a group that is, and I hate to use this word, I'm using it in a literal sense, diverse, right? There is a diversity there. And I'm not saying that in like diversity is our strength thing, but it's just the reality. It's that people who are different, that look different, that act different, are becoming more attracted to conservatism.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
You have a show with us. It's called Chicks and Balances. It comes out every Wednesday. Is that correct? That's your time slot. What are you aiming to do with that? What are you aiming to promote with Chicks and Balances?
So it was me and a buddy, and we had both worked in conservative politics, and found that there were and we were having these long-winded conversations about the party, about where it's headed, about our place in it, conversations I'm sure you've had a number of times. And we thought that there was such a vacancy for people that not only looked at it like us, but were our age. And we thought that as we get older, we want to make sure that younger women feel like there's a place for them in conservative politics. I'll give you an example. When I first went to a club night at McGill, the conservative booth was just full of guys. So it was very intimidating, just naturally, without, getting into identity politics. It's naturally very intimidating for, a young girl to walk up to a group of men. And then the year after, there were 2 girls at the booth, me included. And I found a lot of, curious girls coming up, asking us what we were about, signing our newsletter. And so just, making it clear that, the Conservative Party, or not even the party, but, conservative ideas is for everyone and should be explored by everyone, is just very important. And I think that's what Chicks and Balances should be about. And ultimately, it's my goal.
You bring up a point that I think a lot of conservatives don't want to accept or embrace, which is that there is a reality that people will be attracted to something, call it a group or a club, like you mentioned, based on similarity, right? And I think conservatives naturally, and maybe to some degree rightly, are afraid of identity politics, are afraid of quotas, of saying, well, we need to have, a black person and a Muslim person and a woman here so that we look like we like everyone. And obviously that's been inflated in liberal circles to basically just pander. But I think the reality is that there is something to that. And you mentioned your club. I had very similar experiences at UBC with the Free Speech Club, where inherently it does become mostly young guys. And it really takes that first really brave girl to like jump into that pool. But then by doing so, you do have this exponential thing where you're at the booth, you're a woman, you're a female who's a conservative. Women look at that and they think, maybe there is space for me here. It's just the way human beings work. And I know that identity politics is not popular, and I'm by no means a fan of it. But I think you bring up a good point, and I'm glad that that's what Chicks and Balances is aiming to accomplish. I think what I wanted to ask you about, I guess, is to I know you mentioned before the call that you're getting less partisan. I'm getting less partisan as well. But I wanted to pick your brain on the Conservative Party of Canada itself and the direction it's going in. Do you feel, based on everything we've talked about right now, diversity and all that fun jazz stuff, do you feel like it's going in a correct direction for electoral success?
No, because as Aaron O'Toole tries to become a little more progressive, to become a little more palatable to Canadians, good for him, I guess. But those voters are not coming here. The ship has sailed. People who care about the environment, or not so much care about the environment, but want to tackle it in a very strict way, aren't voting for you already. So you're just kind of upsetting your base while running after a shadow, essentially. Yeah, the Conservative Party is strange because they say all the right things, but I still don't feel represented in that party. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're very good at posturing as if they're evolving, if that's the right word, but it feels stale. It really does. What do you think?
Well, I mean, stale is one way to put it. I think there's an inauthenticity to it where, I mean, you bring up a great point on the environment, right? Where essentially there is a carbon tax being introduced now. And it's like, we just spent 9 years bitching about the carbon tax, and now all of a sudden we're for it. And at the end of the day, people who list the environment as their most important issue are not going to suddenly say, oh, now I like the Conservatives, I'm going to vote for them. Like, those people, we're trying to pander to people who hate us. Quite frankly, it is hate. Like, the people we're trying to pander to hate Conservatives. So it makes you wonder if all the party is doing is pivoting left, getting no votes, and pissing off the base. And that's what I think is happening. But if that is the case, and I've brought this up to people within the party, and this is what they ask. If that's the case, and let's say you're right, what do you do then? You can't just stay with one shrinking group on the right. We can't pivot left because they don't like Conservatives no matter what you do. So how do you win? What do you do to represent the country?
Well, let me ask you something. When you think conservative, what comes to mind? What do you think conservatism is? Because no one is articulating this to us.
Yeah, so on a moral level, nobody is. So when I think of conservative, I think of individualism. I think of basic Western liberal values. I mean, not capital L, like liberal in the Enlightenment sense. I think of someone who believes that their destiny should be in their own hands, not the government's. It's someone who understands fundamentally the inherent flaw of people, of humans, the inherent, I don't want to say sin, but the fact that we are all so flawed that it would be highly problematic to give power to a centralized system because we're going to screw it up. It's someone who understands the way human nature is. To me, that's what a conservative is. Now, there are conservatives who are social conservatives and, believe in Judeo-Christian values. There are fiscal conservatives who, believe in lower taxes and a stronger economy. But at a basic level, I think that's a conservative is someone who believes in freedom, individual liberty, and opportunity.
Yeah, and I think very well said. And I think that if you were able to translate that to young people, because young people are feeling very anxious right now for a plethora of reasons, and if a conservative party, based on those values of freedom, of opportunity, of self-determination, were able to tap into them, I think young people would be very receptive, because we do want to make our own way. Gen Z is the most entrepreneurial generation, since, before Gen X. What's before Gen X? I don't remember. Yeah, like we're very entrepreneurial. We don't want to do, the 9 to 5. We're much more hardworking than millennials. Sorry. And I just don't understand why the Conservative Party hasn't been able to tap into them.
I think something that's really stuck out to me, based on young conservatives that I speak to, it's that the conservative, and this is young conservatives, so these are people who are already converts, but they're saying, this bugs me. Mm-hmm. I think our generation is annoyed with how out of touch some of the old guard is in terms of, look, the biggest priority is just lower taxes. We just got to lower taxes so I don't have to pay high property taxes or whatever. Like, we just got to lower taxes so we can make money and be successful. Mm-hmm. When the reality is, for a lot of us, I would like lower taxes because I believe it's better for the market. But at some point, when free speech is being censored and you have these large moral imperatives, it's like, I'm starting not to give a shit about that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm starting to feel like our message needs to be a broader moral one, because we know the left, everything is moral. You talked about this. Everything is moral. Everything is the end of the world. You are either on the side that wants to save the world from climate change, or you're on the side that tries to apply like just pure, logic to it that doesn't work with voters, right? So I think for young conservatives, as far as I can tell, the largest issues for us, the most prominent issues, are larger cultural issues. What do you think?
You think we win on cultural issues?
I think
or we could win?
I think that's what is speaking to a lot of people. I think it speaks to, young people. Well, we know in general it speaks to young people, because half of them think the world is ending and we need to climate change and we need to ban people who say bad things. But I think I speak to so many people who are not political, who are our age, and are saying, man, like, I feel really uncomfortable to say certain things. I feel restricted. I feel like we're not allowed to make jokes anymore. Comedy isn't allowed anymore. I feel like there's no opportunity to do anything, to be innovative. Everything is restrictive. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that, I don't know, I could be wrong. I feel like it's a winning issue to be like, we are going to be a party or a movement that is going to liberate you from your restriction, that is going to allow you to fulfill your destiny, become successful, and go on your hero's journey. And, I don't hear that, right?
No. And the vessel is half the battle. Aaron O'Toole is not going to be our savior. He's not going, like, no offense, he doesn't inspire the kind of relief I think that a lot of young people, like you said, are very desirous of. We live in a very puritanical culture. It's all encompassing. You feel it constantly. Even opening up this camera, Angelo, I always have, sorry, my camera always stops. I always have this little voice, like, be very, very careful, because you don't know what's going to be taken out of context in 2, 5, 10 years from now. Young people are deadly afraid of taking risks. I think you're right in the sense that that is a deeply cultural problem that has almost nothing to do with policy right now. But at the same time, this might be a little unpopular, but at the same time, as you said, the old guard, they're done taking their risks. They don't see these issues of free speech, online presence, scared to make a joke at a dinner party the same way as we do, because not that their lives are over, but they've made the friends that they're going to make. They've made the connections they're going to make. So I think it's definitely incumbent on young conservatives to, like you said, I didn't think about it like that, but definitely make this a cultural, and I think a winning issue for sure. But again, like, the party has to start looking at us like us. They need to start talking like us. I don't see Candice Bergen, even though we're two, conservative gals, like, I have nothing in common with her, despite maybe some conservative ideals.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some up and coming people. I mean, are you familiar with Melissa Lantsman?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, she's an example of someone who's, younger and represents us a little more. But you're right. I mean, look, on the free speech issue, the party is now against Bill C-10, which is a horrible bill and it needs to be stopped. But it does still feel like they're only against that after the grassroots freaked out about it. So everything is always reactionary with the conservatives. It's all in reaction too. So, I mean, just to finish things off, how do we save Canada?
Save Canada. More conversations like these. Being honest, not being scared to take mistakes and take risks in Canada. Everything is so, sanitized and refined and like PC. I think as long as we keep pushing back against that, I think we're going to be on our way to a freer, in every single sense, a freer Canada.
Very well said. So people can watch your content every Wednesday on the Postmillennial channel.
Yes,
is that
right.
correct?
Check it out.
All right. Go. Well, I messed that up, didn't I? Go check out Sam's content on Wednesday. Sam, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Angelo.
All right. That was Sam Dagres from Chicks and Balances. You can find her show every Wednesday on the Postmillennial channel. Let me know what you thought. I thought it was a really fun conversation, really enlightening, I feel like, to speak to someone who's about my age and has similar experiences in conservatism. And I think for older audiences, it might be kind of a good insight into what we're going through. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please share this video if you found it interesting. And until next time, I'm Angelo Isidoro, and this is Cancel This. If you liked that video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to the Postmillennial. For daily news and content, please go to thepostmillennial.com and consider becoming a member. For $5 a month, you can get rid of all the advertisements on the site. If you like what I'm wearing on my head, you can go to shop.postmillennial.com, where we have beanies, mugs, and t-shirts. Please consider supporting the Postmillennial however you can. It's massively appreciated. Thank you.